Good morning, friends. The poem that is displayed on your screen, Where the Mind is Without Fear, is written by Rabindranath Tagore. Before starting the poem and understanding its different parameters, let us first try to understand Rabindranath Tagore. Friends, I have displayed Rabindranath Tagore's a brief introduction on your screen. Rabindranath Tagore was an Indian poet born in 1861 in Kolkata, and in past it was called Calcutta. He was and is the foremost poet in the Bengali language and was also versed in short story, play, and essay writer, as well as painting and composing music. Rabindranath Tagore was interested in composing music. He was also has a passion of painting as well. Besides, he is a prolific writer. He started writing poetry early, and throughout his life, he would publish several books as well as a complete collection of his work. In 1913, he became the first non European to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. In 1913, he became the first non European to win Nobel Prize in Literature. His goal was to blend the best of Indian and the Western poetry, an element of his writing clearly present in his poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear. During the time in which this poem was written, India was still under the control of British Empire. In 1915, only 5 years after this poem was written, Tagore was awarded a knighthood but gave it up in protest only 4 years later when British troops killed 400 Indian demonstrators. He died in 1941 in Calcutta. Now you can understand this particular poem is written before our independence, and the most important thing you have to remember, in 1915, only 5 years after this poem was written, Tagore was awarded a knighthood, but he gave it up in protest only 4 years later when British troops killed 400 Indian demonstrators. And Rabindranath Tagore died in 1941 before independence in Calcutta. Readers, let us try to understand a little bit about the poem, what this poem is all about. Now, the title you can easily understand out of this, Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore, is one of his vastly read and discussed poems. Now, this particular poem is vastly read and it is discussed, widely discussed. It was originally composed in Bengali, possibly in 1900, under the title Prathna, meaning prayer. Prathna in Bengali, it is called prayer. It appeared in the volume called Naya Beda in 1901. It appeared in the volume called Naya Veda in 1901. Later, in 1911, Tagore himself translated the Bengali poem into English, and that translation appeared as Poem 35 in his Nobel winning anthology Gitanjali, Song Offerings. Now, Song Offerings, published by the Indian Society, London in 1912. Now you can understand this particular poem exists at serial number 35 in his anthology, what is called Gitanjali. And Gitanjali is the book on which he has been given Nobel Prize. Now, a very brief introduction about the poem. The poem is a prayer for what Tagore wishes and imagines for his country. Now, what he wishes and what he imagines in future for his country, that is basically discussed in just 8 lines. The country was in the clutches of slavery and superstitions. The poet invokes God to bring about a new dawn of freedom, dignity, and knowledge. Now, readers, one thing you have to remember, and it is very important to remember in order to understand the background of the poem is written in the pre independence era. Now, the entire poem is basically a patriotic song as well as a sort of prayer. And Rabindranath Tagore appeals to God to awake his country to a dawn of freedom. He would like India to be an ideal country. That is what he imagines in the poem. Okay, readers, let us try to understand the poem. Now, the poem is displayed on your screen. You can easily see it. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. Now, this is very small poem, but the message is very strong. Now, readers, if you look up upon the first 5 lines, you can easily understand what is his message, what type of prayer this poem is all about, and how patriotism is imbibed in Rabindranath Tagore. Now, what he wants to say, that is very interesting. He says, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Now, head is held high is simply when somebody is proud, when somebody feels some sort of ego that he lives in a country where mind is without fear, where mind is without fear. Now, in these lines, the poet prays that his country should be fearless. The people should be self-respecting, where knowledge is free, where knowledge should not be considered as some sort of monopoly, or sometimes what happens, the knowledge is given to the elite class or to the rich only. Rabindranath Tagore wishes that he wants to have a country where mind is without fear, where his head is held high, where people are self-respecting, where knowledge is free, where knowledge is given to each and every person in the country, and that free of cost, where the world has not been broken up into fragments, where the country has not been broken up into parts, his countrymen should not suffer from narrow mindedness, by narrow domestic walls. Now you can understand the line 3 and 4, where the world has not been broken up into fragments. The country is broken up into fragments only when there is narrow mindedness, which can only create division among them. Narrow walls, there are number types of problems in a country. For example, if you see in those days when this poem is written, there is the issue of Harijan versus Brahmanas. There is the issue of religions. There is the issue of sects. There is the issue of regions. You have lot of narrow domestic walls. And Rabindranath Tagore figures out that he wants to live there in such a country, in such an India, where the country has not been broken up into parts, and country is broken into parts only by narrow mindedness, by what he suggests is by narrow domestic walls. Domestic walls are simply considered the walls within the country, which has which you know which creates some sort of violence and chaos and disorder and anarchy in the entire country. And then he says, where the words come out from the depth of truth, where the words come out from the depths of truth. Now, what does this line suggest? He wishes that the people should be truthful from the core of their hearts. And then he says, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. Where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. Where people should be very hard worker. They should continue making efforts to attain perfection in all fields of life. Where clear stream of reason has not lost its way. Now this is interesting line. Clear stream of reason means logic. What he wants to convey, that the people should be guided by reason. They should be guided by reason. Otherwise what happens? There are number of problems. When you look upon customs, when you look upon traditions, you have lot of problems with customs and traditions. And Rabindranath Tagore wanted that people should make endless efforts to attain perfection, and at the same time they should be guided by reason, which would rid them of old habits and customs which are no longer useful, and thus lead them on to the path of progress and prosperity. Again, see these lines. Where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way. The reason should always be there. The logic should always be there. The understanding should be given more weightage that over traditions and habits, into the dreary desert sand of dead habits. Now, dreary desert sand of dead habits simply means what he wants to say. The poet says that is countrymen to get rid of the unprogressive past. Unprogressive past. They should take to a new way of life. Dreary desert sand of dead habits simply means unprogressive, something that is unprogressive. And then he see the clear stream of reason. It is considered to be clarity of mind based on the use of reason, not contaminated by superstition and blind faith. In India, when you see, normally what happens, you have superstitious people are there, there is blind faith, and people understand is what is happening in tradition and what is happening with the customs is considered to be, something that is divine. But Rabindranath Tagore in the poem wishes God, you know appeals to God that he wants to have a country which is progressing because of logic, because of reason. Reason should always be there, logic should always be there. That's why, you know, people should avoid archaic systems, old traditions, and and involvement in superstitions, etc. And then he says, where the mind is led forward by thee. He wishes that his country, thee is basically the word that is associated with God. He says, where the mind is led forward by thee, the mind is led forward by God into ever widening thought and action. Into ever widening thought. Now, readers, you can understand here ever widening thought. It is considered to be progressivism, or a state where the human mind's capability to advance is not curtailed. It is considered to be progressing, somebody who progresses. That means where the mind is led forward by God into ever widening thought and action, into what is called a progressivism, into that heaven of freedom. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Let his country awake. Now, in these lines, the poet prays to God to guide the minds of his countrymen. Then they would automatically be led into ever expanding areas of thought and action. He prays that his country should become a place of complete freedom and everlasting bliss. This is, you know, what Rabindranath Tagore suggests us in the poem. We will be looking at its other areas in the next lecture, where we will discuss again the summary of the poem and the poetic devices that are being used in the poem in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye. May God bless you.